I started my journey as an F-15E mechanic in the United States Air Force. It wasn't just about keeping the plane in the air. It was about understanding it, learning it, and eventually the desire to fly it. In an interview when I was 19, I said,
Next 5-10 years, I see myself flying the jet I'm working on.
And that's exactly what I did, fulfilling my dreams and more. But my story doesn't end in the cockpit. Over my time in the Air Force, I traveled to some incredible places, met fascinating people, danced salsa, and had countless conversations. And you know what I learned? Everyone has a story. An incredible journey that shapes who they are. That's why I created this channel, to share some of those stories with you. So buckle up, Buttercup, and let's get into it.
You know, as you get older, you start to kind of realize that the parent that you idolized was also around when the parent that was very tough was doing the things that they were doing.
I think that the thing that we're not talking about when it comes to communication in its current state, because we're connected, right?
Oh, for sure.
We're a global community
Yep.
at this point, is the quality of those connections also matter.
I really think that loss of communication means that we just don't see each other anymore, which to me is pretty catastrophic. There's this familiar thing in all of us because we're all these, human beings of similar type. And it's so beautiful that we all have this in common.
Hey everybody, welcome to Melding Minds. I'm your host, Clarence Abercrombie, and I'm joined by Rachael Fleischman. She is a wife, engineer, and a person I met randomly on an airplane. Yep. So what was it like having some weirdo talk to you on an airplane, talking about a podcast and how you should do it?
To be honest, my husband is so social. And so really, if it had been just me, I don't know that I probably would have had my headphones and maybe we would have never spoken to each other. But Paul is so friendly and, just communicative. And so to me, it was very typical. It was a very typical outing for us it's kind of like being with my younger brother, just a random person on the plane that we've become friends with felt normal because I feel like I give my husband more credit for that than myself, probably.
So you mentioned that you had siblings. How many siblings do you have?
I have two younger brothers.
Okay.
We're all adults now, but younger brothers, early 30s.
What was it like growing up with your younger brothers, being the older sister?
That's a loaded question. Being the older sister, it was beautiful. They are my best friends in the world, and not to jump straight to my therapist, but she always, and I think that this is a really great way to explain us. She says that we're the healthiest trauma bond she's ever experienced. And that's probably the neon sign for me and my brothers is we are the way that we are because of some of the hardships that we have been through together. But we've been able to do something really beautiful with it too. And so, there was some not so good, but as adults, at least mostly, we're still siblings and we still, are our greatest checks and balances system. But other than, it's usually pretty great. They're people that I deeply trust. I'm someone that really appreciates people understanding me, and they have this kind of built-in, filter. They've watched me my entire life. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's kind of beautiful that I have so much trust with them.
So I firmly believe that hardship is what creates really strong bonds.
Yes.
What hardships are you referring to?
Yeah. So without being too specific, just because some people are still alive, my mom it's kind of a long series of events, some of them not in her control, some of them in her control. when she as you get older, you realize that your mother's struggles or triumphs didn't start with you. And so now that I'm an adult, I understand that, her story is much further back than me. She also did not grow up in stability or consistency. But starting from time zero in my life, she was diagnosed with cancer very young and had it multiple times. And over the course of our childhoods, and it was in her throat on her vocal cords. And so she couldn't talk to us a lot when we were young. And like that causes all kinds of problems. You know what I mean? Like your mom can't speak to you.
Yeah.
So it affects, me in different ways, whereas like I'm a child having to speak for her. And I'm a child who's having to communicate with my brothers. It's one of the reasons we've developed, the type of bond that we have. And so those are hardships that were out of her control, 100%. And so that was difficult when we were young. I think that as she's gotten older, some of her kind of long-standing autoimmune issues have gotten to her brain. And so there's like definitely some neurological deterioration that's happened. And so you're kind of dealing with maybe not always talking with someone who's like totally there or, remembers things quite the same way that you do. But she had a difficult time from things that were out of her control. I would say, if I'm being completely honest, like I would say to, my therapist that I trust, she also responded badly in some ways. My brothers and I have talked about this extensively. It's one of the reasons that we've been able to get past some of the things that have happened to us. And I think like one of the kind of conclusions is she wasn't present for so long out of her control that she maybe overcorrected. And so when she was healthy again, she, maybe enforced her parenting in ways that weren't necessary anymore because we were older. And so it's almost like, time we had grown up so much, they had relied on me that I think when she was ready, and I either don't remember or can't really speak to like what happened to when she was back with us more.
Yeah.
We just weren't who she left. And that was and still frankly is today, a difficult thing to square. You know what I mean? Like it has been difficult since then for us to find what our relationships really look like anymore. Because in some way she tries to parent us still to this day like we're the same age that we were when she kind of had to check out. And so that's the short maybe story of my mom, is that she was with us and not with us, at different times of our childhood. And I had to step in more. I mean, we have a dad. He's amazing. He's always been very present. As you get older, you start to kind of realize that the parent that you idolize was also around when the parent that was very tough was doing the things that they were doing. And so it's definitely not, he feels like a lighthouse to me in so many ways, but, I also am aware that he enabled my mother in a lot of other ways. But I guess what I was saying is, I had to become an adult as a child in ways that I hope that no children have to. But I wasn't alone. I had an aunt who was very present. My dad was present, but like working all the time because he was the only income and there were 3 kids. So yeah, that's the kind of story on my mom in whatever way you can really say it in such, it's a long, long story. but that's the short.
That's the gist of it?
Yeah, that's the short version.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like you don't really feel like you had a childhood. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely not. I reference music a lot. I don't know that we've ever talked about that. There's a band that I love called Bleachers. He's I guess like lead singer is Jack Antonoff. He's one of my favorite producers. But he has a line in a song that, just talks about like, I had this feeling that I never was young. And I remember the first time I heard that and I was just like, damn, like that is exactly how it feels, which is like my favorite thing about music is that someone says something and you're like, holy shit, you have put into words like this feeling that I've never really let out before. And yeah, that's 100% true. I think that there have been times where I've been super angry that I, didn't have a childhood in the ways that maybe other people do. But then there's also times where I'm like, I wouldn't be where I'm at right now and have some of the strengths that I have if I hadn't had to, navigate the world on my own when I was younger.
It sounds like when you talk about your father, that in some ways you said he is a lighthouse. But it also sounds like you might be struggling with how much responsibility for the situation that you lived through.
Right.
How much responsibility does he hold for that? Is that something you're struggling with?
Yeah, I don't know if like currently struggling. Maybe. It's definitely something, my middle brother is a therapist, a trauma therapist. And so therapy wasn't a thing in our house growing up. Maybe it, is more of a thing now, period, than it used to be, but still, it wasn't really something that was kind of on my scope before Sam started his master's degree. And it was years later when I finally went. He went first. But one of the big takeaways, that comes out of dealing with kind of one parent that you really struggle with is like, what was the other parent doing? And so, yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, I feel like the peak of that feeling has passed, but the peak of the feeling that maybe my dad was to blame in some ways as well. It certainly is still on my mind occasionally, but it's not as heavy of it's something that I've accepted a little bit more. I can understand it a little bit more. I can forgive him for the ways that he reacted to my mother, and forgive him for just trying to survive, given what we were going through and having 3 children. But, so it comes up, it's a feeling that comes up occasionally, but not nearly as much as like the first time it hits you. And it's just like this hero, still like definitely feels like a hero, but there are some things that I wish could have gone differently.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Do parents have an obligation to protect their children?
I think so. I really do. I guess I'm afraid of like extreme like 0 or 100%.
Yeah, always nevers.
Yeah. But I wish that I had been protected in some ways that I wasn't. I'm very protective of my brothers. I'm even more protective sometimes of they just both had their first child while I've been out here. So I have 2 nephews now that are 2 years old, about. And yeah, I definitely have a reaction to it when I see my mother do some of the manipulative things to them that she has done to us. The response is protect them. And so if that's like an instinct that's supposed to exist, then I think my answer is yes. You protect them as much as you can. I I definitely think that life is super difficult and there's so many challenges, and it's more than just raising your children. But in a perfect world, if you were going to have kids, like the minimum you could do is protect them.
Yeah.
For sure.
I find through the conversations that I've had that most people who have gone through things where they feel like they weren't protected as children, that they don't want them themselves. Do you want children?
No. I haven't always responded that way, though. So I don't know if I've talked about this quite a bit as well, and I think some of my conclusions are I would have been open to children, but it just hasn't happened at the right time. One of the conversations I've had before is, if you're not 100% sure, just let it rot until you have, strong feelings. And I definitely really believe in that. Like as just a general concept. Like don't go chase something because you feel like you have to make a decision. Just continue to feel your feelings and go through every day. And if the wind changes, then you'll know.
Yeah.
That's kind of my view on kids as well. I've always been open to them. I think there have been, like, again, wind changes in my life where I thought, yeah, I could be a mom for sure. But I would probably guess if there was like a way to play back, my memories and thoughts, I'd say probably consistently I've not wanted them. I think that if Paul and I, my husband and I, had a child, we would be great parents. But I think that I'm tired in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And if I zoom out and think what would the best choice be, not for just us, but because there's going to be a third person involved, I think the best choice for us would be to just be present for our nephews, maybe nieces one day, and not have a child on our own.
I think people's responses are very different. I had one person tell me that they felt that they were so broken that they didn't want any children to inherit that. Yeah.
That's tough.
And so we had a conversation. This is not on any podcast. Just a normal
just a friend,
yeah. And we had a conversation, and I was like, "You're not broken," like, and having them accept that. Going, hey, I'm not broken, was a difficult hill for us to climb. Oftentimes, if you were to put somebody in the exact same circumstances as the person who's living with that trauma, they would largely respond similarly. So when you look at it through that logic, you go, is this really a you thing or is this an environment thing? And if you are able to provide a different environment, maybe that's not something that you're passing on. And I know that's not the circumstances that you're in.
For sure. I definitely understand it. One of the reasons that I've kind of heard a similar narrative is my husband. He speaks, for himself better than I do. But one of the things that he has said is that he really did think he wanted to be a dad. Some because he felt like he had more than his dad did, some to kind of rewrite that story in his brain of how to be a father. And I think I've seen that response before. It's not mine, maybe because in a lot of ways I did raise my brothers. And so there's a part of me that kind of feels like I've checked that box in a way. Like I have experienced some of that in some ways and maybe do feel some of those feelings. Again, in no way to say that I've been a mother, like someone who has birthed a child and raised them from ground zero. But I do think that I have some experience in that area. And so I don't know. I wouldn't be afraid of it. I wouldn't feel like I was going to pass on. I was going to say, I wouldn't feel like I was going to pass on any more than like probably what happens to everyone. Like it's impossible to not pass things on to your children. I definitely, I don't know, like I mentioned my mom having some autoimmune disorders. I've inherited some of those. And so there is some part of me that just like doesn't want women to have some of the same health problems that I've had.
Yeah.
And so I'd want to, that would be kind of tough if I had a daughter and started seeing, like signs of her thyroid not working well or, whatever it was.
The things that you endured.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But not like emotional or psychological. I wouldn't be afraid of that.
I strongly believe that to raise a healthy society, that it takes us as a community to kind of come together and make that happen. As a community, what are we not getting right? What are we not thinking about that we should be thinking about?
Define community in this question. Like, I feel like communities exist in so many different ways in so many different places.
Yeah.
And maybe my answer would change. If you mean like nuclear family, extended family community, if you mean a single town community, then zooms out from there.
How would you define it just from the word? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah. I might have to get you to re-ask the question. I think of for me, like as me being the, kind of center of the viewpoint, community is my surroundings, like my interactions. So I think of my friends and family as community. I think of my coworkers as community.
Okay.
Again, that's from a very self-centered perspective, but my like day-to-day, on average interactions with the world is how I think about community, where I can actually make influence and where they can make influence on me is that's my instinct for community.
Okay.
Yeah.
So by that definition, what are we missing? What are we not getting right?
I think that we get a lot right. I think that maybe I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. Maybe one thing that I try to do in my community is, build some sort of perspective for the people around me. And I think maybe like if I zoom out, what I'm trying to say is, something that has definitely been said before, which is just we're constantly in this dialogue that it's us talking, it's me talking to me, but the person sitting across from you, it's them talking to themselves. And there's just so much you don't know about that other person. And so maybe the answer to the question of like, what could we be better at? What are we not getting right? I think that you really have to get to know each other in a way that helps you understand each other. Because to me, that helps in my surrounding community be more, forgiving and understanding and, hold more room for people to be themselves and make mistakes and, all that kind of. I really think that like relationships fall apart because communication is not at its best, and communication is that avenue where you can actually understand each other. Mm-hmm. So that's probably my answer. Is in like my view of community, I really think that not only do you have to understand how to speak for yourself, how to communicate who you are, what you think. I'm thinking right now of like a coworker who is fairly conflict avoidant. And sometimes that really hurts him because he has a lot of good things to say. He has a lot of perspectives that I think people should hear, but nothing's ever going to change if you haven't learned how to speak for yourself. And then if you haven't learned how to, kind of listen and absorb to what that other person is saying to you so that you can, build those bridges to move on.
How much of that is being able to set forth your own voice, and how much of that is listening to the opinions in the room?
I don't know. It probably depends on your, position in the room. If you're in a leadership position in the room, maybe you aren't talking as much as you're listening. I think that if you have a team of people, at least from my perspective, I really want to know what they think. And especially on a team like mine, I'm using my team as kind of the example. You could probably use it for anything, but they all have unique skills in different areas. And so if we come into a room to try to understand a situation that happened or make a plan for the future, in that situation, I think that they talk, 60 to 70% of the time. I talk 30 to 40. But if I change the discussion, I don't know, like my husband is an example. In a dream world, we're 50-50. My brothers and I, in a dream world where I would want us to be equal as well. It's probably situational. I think it's really important to learn how to communicate what you're thinking and feeling. But I also think it's really important. It's probably the side that I struggle with the most is the listening. I've had to really, maybe that's some of just like over brain activity is, you speak and you really, it's a conscious effort for me to like make sure that I'm not continuing to think and absorbing what's being said back to me. And I think that it's not, I really value like what other people have to say to me because it takes the weight off of me. Like I don't have to, especially as someone who had to make decisions and make things happen when they were young, and kind of forced into a situation. I love when I don't have to do that as an adult. But it takes time to calm my brain, or it has taken time to learn how to do that better. Is it when I finish talking, you really have to absorb what's being said after, because it's important and you need it, but it's two different things. Like you want to hear it, but it's also the act of slowing your own brain down and trying to listen.
I want to touch on something when you were talking about the leadership speaking versus listening side of that. Because as someone who's been in a leadership role myself, right, is you look at the time that you're speaking and you go, it's only like 20, 30% of the time, right? Mm-hmm. The problem is if you have a room full of 12 people, the amount of talking that is happening because you group them all together, and at least in my mind I do. I go, okay, me talking, them talking. But the them is not necessarily an even split around that room. So you can have someone who feels like maybe they only communicate 1% of the time, and you can have another person who feels like they're communicating 20% of the time or 40% of the time. So from a leadership perspective, but also from a personal perspective, putting yourself in the shoes of somebody who's not in a leadership position, who's just sitting in that room, who has something valuable to contribute. How do you manage that part of the communication space?
I'm really literal. And so like most of the time I absorb questions very specifically to like my experiences in my life and my team. Like I have, new people who might not speak as much as some of my other people. But if I take that away, just like time in the paint off, the table. I really, a lot of times, maybe I shouldn't do this, but I put it on myself because I want to know their skill sets. And so in my mind, when we're sitting around the table solving a problem, as we start to peel back, like what's going to resolve it or what needs to be done to get to the next phase or whatever, the specific things that have to happen are usually within the wheelhouse of one of my people because we're a very small team. We do a lot of stuff. And so each person really has to carry. I've been on teams before where maybe there was more fluff that, would go to some sort of conversation and not have to speak or want to speak or whatever. And that was okay because their larger group had someone speaking for them. My current team doesn't work that way. And so there's a part of me that if there was, someone who, that 1% person who didn't want to speak, it would either be a situation where they weren't the right person to solve that problem. So I'm looking at somebody else at the table to, have the conversation with me. Or I would ask them, I would use any name. This is your area. I know that you have something to say here. Let's talk this out. Or if this definitely happens, sometimes you kind of have people speaking for things outside of their wheelhouse. And I'm sure I do that too. It's like, okay, it's great that we feel this way, but there's someone who is more skilled in this area than me in this room. And I really need, I try to pull it out. Yeah. I guess is what I'm trying to say. In some ways, maybe not always successfully, but I do try.
Yeah.
They have to speak for themselves, but I'm trying to pull it out.
I think that's an important thing to do, especially in the initial phases, right? Like you have someone who's just joined your team. They feel like they don't have a voice. Yeah. And then you empower them by basically giving them the floor. Yes. I think that's a very good thing. I do think, though, at some point, they have to start feeling comfortable. Yes. Projecting that voice in the rooms, especially when they're the expert in the room.
It's a transition. I agree with you. If I think about even what you just said, I work in a almost entirely male world and always have. Maybe not every, female engineer would feel the same way, but in the worlds that I've ended up in have been almost entirely male, like 1 to 3 women around hundreds at all times. And one of the best things that my first boss ever did for me was didn't answer questions for me, even though he knew everything I was doing and could do it. As I was kind of getting trained up, he read when I was ready, and if a question was asked or if there was a problem to solve, he would defer. Like he got really good at saying, Rachel knows way better than me on this. You should go ask her. Or it's even sometimes he would kind of have to say in a room like, Rachel just said that. And it was a really good thing for me to have and also like take away for the future. That was one way that I kind of got trained up to speak. I've always been super verbal, but maybe in that context was one way that I got trained up to speak because my boss would defer to me.
I really love that. I really love that. And the reason I love that is because I think it creates an environment of credibility and trust within the team, right? If somebody asks me the question and we've had a sidebar conversation, so I already know the answer, but it's your thing. Yeah, I could answer that question and sound like the smart guy in the room who knows everything that's happening in the project. I could do that. But by me going, actually, Rachel, you want to speak on that? And then you talk on it. Now everybody who was there to hear that conversation goes, Rachel knows what she's talking about when it comes to this thing. Yeah. And I have just built up your credibility, which then also allows people to start fostering a relationship of trust towards you.
Yes. It's one of my favorite things. I've actually, now that we're talking about it, I've thought about it a lot lately because the program that I'm running right now, not to be like super specific, but it started with just me because they were still getting some, contractual stuff together. And so for a while I had to initiate the program and get a bunch of stuff stood up on my own. And then when I got a team of 13 people, as we slowly built it, I've had to remind myself, this is the theme here, that I'm not by myself and I have other people. And, I've had to consciously do exactly what you just described, which is I don't have to answer every question anymore. I don't have to be in every conversation anymore. I can just send people out and they can come back and let me know how it goes or ask me if you need any help from me.
That transition from the person who's in the trenches doing the job into a leadership position, though, is not easy.
No, it's not.
Right? Hey, I don't have to be the person with the answer anymore, or I don't have to be the person to fix this anymore is a difficult transition.
Yeah.
As you've made that transition, how did you manage that? Was it difficult for you? And what was the most difficult part?
I would say the most difficult part is probably just, building a team of people that you trust and letting go. One of my favorite things about my prior boss was that he wasn't, kind of I don't know what the right term is, like hummingbird or, like micromanage. Yeah, that's, and so him being so hands-off gave me so much agency. And I don't know that that's my instinct because I was raising two brothers and have like always had to, step in. I don't know if that was my instinct, but I do think that I have gotten better at it. Just trusting your people and letting them succeed and fail, because even if they fail, like you can try again and work it out. You know what I mean? There's always ways of, clean or picking up the pieces. I think that's been the most difficult part. Is maybe every leader would say this is just like delegating and just kind of letting go and, trusting your people to get it done. It's funny though, because I really do trust them. It's just, we were so new to each other that you're still kind of trying to learn, again, who people are, what they're good at, what you can give them and what you can't give them. Because I'm sure a leader would say the same thing for me. Like, Rachel can get these things done, but this isn't her area of expertise. So it's that was a learning curve for me, and just understanding who was good at what and who to send, which tasks to. And so I don't know, again, that transition into pushing everything down and letting them get things done wasn't immediate for me, but I don't think it was because it was, maybe some of it was me transitioning, but some of it was just getting to know each other. There's so much newness in it. And I would imagine that any future team I'm on, I'd feel the same. You have to take a beat, figure out who you've got, figure out what they're good at, and then, use them accordingly. Yeah.
But wouldn't you say that's establishing trust?
Sure.
Hey, I just took over this team.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you framed it as I'm getting to know them, but really, I think at the nuts and bolts of that, it's I'm getting to know what their capabilities are.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting to know where their expertise is. I'm getting to know where I can trust them, and where I need to maybe give this thing to somebody else because this is a weak area for them.
Yeah. You're exactly right. You could probably wrap that into building the trust that you need to then go do the job that you do.
To that end, how do you manage failure? First for yourself and then for your team.
Manage failure for myself. I want to learn from it. At the heart of it all, I am an engineer who wants to analyze a system for how it operates. And when you find abnormalities, be able to root cause those, resolve them, and then run it again. And so I think of myself the same way. I would imagine that, criticism, like feedback, it's not that it's all like sunshine and rainbows response, but it is really important to me. I try to be someone who is, good at receiving, what's the term for like positive criticism?
Constructive criticism.
Yeah, constructive criticism. Like no one is perfect, and also no situation is usually simple. Especially if I think about my team, like if we miss a deadline or something goes south, when you really peel back everything that happened, there's usually a line of people, including myself, that could have done something differently. And so I guess my like general approach to failure is, again, just like I would with any system, is to root cause it in a way where we're all really honest about the mistakes that we made. And I'll actually give an example. Generally, like we recently root caused an issue on one of our systems that's been there for 6 months, and I've been like on my network guys, like this behavior that I'm absorbing as a user is not normal. There's something going on, and I need us to resolve it. And I think that I got a little bit of maybe some hesitancy, or it took longer because they didn't know how to fix it, because they didn't know what the problem was. And there was a little, I think, I can't speak for them, but some of it was maybe not wanting to admit that you didn't know how to fix it, or that there's always so much going on that it's hard to focus on this specific problem. But when it bubbled up enough to where it's like, we're not doing anything until we can understand this. We had a good conversation after we did, and we talked about, like, look at all that we have learned. Like, it's actually a really beautiful thing to have these kind of problems, because you learn so much along the way, and that's a behavior in the system that we'll recognize in other instances, and I think it's really awesome that, like, you won't make that mistake again.
But don't you think that the reason that you got there is because you pushed that team to be curious about what the root cause was? Because it doesn't sound like they would have done that on their own.
I don't know that they would have. And curious is one of my favorite words. And I think it's one of the words that like describes me the best. Is I am just like endlessly, I want to understand. When we are solving problems together, we have to approach a problem like it is new. Our past experience is not always going to be relevant. And that's like the beauty of a problem to solve, is that this is something that you haven't seen before. And I am excited about that. Not everyone is, maybe because they've had leadership that responds negatively when they don't know how to do something, which I don't think that I do. And I think that's like the
core.
That's the neon sign. Yeah. Is that, it's a beautiful thing to solve a problem. You probably don't have all of the tools in your bag that you need, but you will gain a new one when you solve this one.
You mentioned that you don't want to be a parent.
Yes.
How much of leadership is like parenting?
I think that it is. Maybe I was like tying it together in my brain. There are so many things. There's like maybe I'll take it back a little bit. There's a part of me that doesn't want it to be. I recently had a coworker who said, now you've got like a group of, 10 to 12 more like your brothers to raise. And I was like, no, I do not. That is not my job. But I think that's a traumatic reaction when in reality, I'm still being raised in so many ways, like by my leadership, but you definitely are. I guess is the without any other explanation answer is yes, of course.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking that question is because I was wondering if you made the connection yourself. Because for me, I look at it from a leadership perspective and I go, I think it's very easy to look at a leadership position and go, oh, it stops when you leave. But the truth of the matter is it doesn't really. You get phone calls. People tell you what's going on in their lives. And you need to be available for all of that, right? Like to be a good leader, you really do need to absorb some of that. I don't know if you need to absorb all of it, but you definitely need to absorb some of it because it helps you understand your people, where they're coming from more, and allows you to lead them better.
Yeah, I think I think my negative response to that is because I was a child who had to parent when she didn't ask to be. And so there's a part of me that that whole concept is sometimes, if I think about it's just, I'm the only woman. So I'm saying men because my team is only men, but, they all had parents. And so there's a part of me that's like, well, I don't have to parent them because they've all had their own parents. But the reality is that you are doing some of that, and that can be a good thing in a lot of different. I always think I won't be with them forever. We are, ships passing in the night in the grand scheme of probably our lives. And if there was anything I could hope for is that my reactions to them or my behaviors with them would be something that they wanted to take with them and use in their own future leadership roles. You know what I mean? I don't want to be a negative figure in their life.
Yeah.
I want to be an understanding and positive figure in their life.
Well, I think that we often call this kind of parenting mentorship.
Oh, okay.
Right? To be fair, my dad is one of my mentors.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
But in the professional realm, we're oh, you need to be a mentor, blah, blah.
Mentor feels better than parent.
Yeah, it feels more comfortable, especially from your life experience.
Yeah.
But in reality, it is a form of raising somebody. The difference is that you're not trying to raise them from a potato.
Yeah, absolutely.
right, into a functioning member of society. You're trying to raise them from a professional potato, right, to a functioning member of your team or company or whatever. And I think that sometimes as a leader or even just someone who's experienced in a certain realm, you forget that you once were a potato in that realm. You didn't know what you were doing. You weren't confident. You were afraid to speak up.
Yeah.
And trying to facilitate a space, an environment where someone has that room to grow into their full potential is a big part of that.
Yeah, I talk about some of my guys, because I'm a mixed bag of people. And I think sometimes some of them want me to be a little harder on some of the others. And one of the examples or one of the phrases that I use again is it's actually really important for them to feel that they're these wild horses that can run free, because I want them to again explore the world on their own. I want them to build their own skills and I don't want to tell them every little thing to do, because I don't think that's what helps them in the long run. I think what helps them in the long run is for them to learn how to speak for themselves, for them to be able to, isolate a problem, for them to be able to solve it. It's important to me that they can do that stuff without me. And so it's hard to find the line sometimes between correcting too early. One of the things my boss said to me the last time I saw, old boss said, but also friend at this point, said to me the last time I was home was, Rachel, you see the future a lot earlier than most people around you, which is a good thing. But when I think about it in like the context of my current team, or even with my brothers or children, like we were talking about, you don't always have to say that. You don't always have to predict the future ahead of time. You can just let them go play it out themselves, and that gains them the skills that they need without you having to be involved in every little thing.
So the conversation has been focused on communication. I asked you, what are we getting wrong as a community? Mm-hmm. I think really the concepts that you're talking about can be explored in larger communities as well.
Sure.
But what is the cost? What's the price of us getting it wrong? What's the price of us not doing that right?
I think, at the grand scale, I really think that loss of communication means that we just don't see each other anymore, which to me is pretty catastrophic. There's this familiar thing in all of us because we're all these, human beings of similar type. And it's so beautiful that we all have this in common. There are countless little things that we agree or disagree on. But I think that there's something similar or, something the same in us that I would hate to ever lose sight of. And there's a part of me that is fearful that communication is like the bridge to that. Again, like being able to reach out and like grab a hold of something that is so similar to you. Like I feel very, dissimilar to like objects around me or, other concepts. There's something very similar about another human being to me. And at least for me, a big part of, connection with this thing that is so similar to me, because we're like these amazing beings, and like being alive is just the wildest thing in the world. And there's someone, sitting across from me now. There's people out in the world that are also they're alive. And it's just the wildest thing that we all get to experience this together. And I think that if we lose the ability to communicate about that, we lose this enormous being that we are together. That sounds kind of, I don't know, like peace and lovey, but I really do mean it. Like I think that we are so much stronger together. And if we, lose the ability to communicate with each other, then we're these isolated things instead of this group.
I think that's a wonderful point. I think that if you think about it at its nuts and bolts, the strength of humanity is our ability to collectively come together and get things done. Before language, right? Like when we just used to grunt and point, or you know what I mean? Like look at where we were. And then when you go, okay, now books, being able to have knowledge transcend time, where I can actually give someone something 50 years in the future, my thoughts, my beliefs, and have them carry it forward to the internet now. I think that the thing that we're not talking about when it comes to communication in its current state, because we're connected, right?
Oh, for sure.
We're a global community at this point, is the quality of those connections also matter.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, our ability to communicate in smaller groups, not just communicating on a grand scale, is what makes us feel close to our surroundings.
I agree. I also think it's not just like verbal or words. There really are feelings involved. And that's, I think, the like human to human part that is really important to me, because it's not just what we're saying, or it's you definitely can connect with an article or a podcast, or you absolutely can connect with those things. To me, it feels different to connect with another person, and it really is layered. It's not just the words that you're saying to each other, but there's something about like other human beings, united in a way that where they're stronger together instead of individual, that I think is really powerful. I agree with you that we're connected, digitally and across time in a way that we never have been before. But something really unique to me is like the other people who are alive around me.
That was one of the goals of this podcast specifically, is to have someone be able to sit in on a conversation that is intimate like this, where we're both trying to be as vulnerable as we can be, and have them be able to take something away from that conversation. It's a way of, like when you were talking about music earlier, and you were like, when you heard that lyric and it connected with you and you were like, someone knows exactly how I'm feeling. That's what I want people to be able to feel with this. And I appreciate you coming on to share your experience with not only myself, but with our audience.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me.
And with that, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.